Welcome back to Knowledge is Kings, guys. I am Kings, and a few months ago I took a trip to Hawaii, and when I was scuba diving just off the coast with my family, I found a skeleton of a sea urchin. Well, I took it home and cast it in resin, and once I trimmed it to its final size, it looked like this. It doesn't look too great, but I'm going to polish it, and I thought I would show you how to do it as well. So without further ado, let's get to it. So I'm going to start with 80 grit sandpaper on my random orbital sander with vacuum attachment. This will get rid of all the saw marks and the unevenness. The lower grits like this, the faster the sanding goes. With all the sanding stages, I will go over everything at least twice, and between each sanding, even of the same grit, I will wipe the surface down with a wet rag. After 80 grit, I switch to 100 grit and repeat the process. To help know where you need to sand, you can mark the surface like this and sand till the marker is gone, and then sand just a little bit longer. It is very important to remove all the scratches created by the previous grit. The previous grits will have scratches that are deeper than the subsequent grits, so if you don't sand properly for each one or try to rush it, you will be sorry. But seriously, don't rush the sanding process, even though it's the best part of every project. But if you do rush it, you'll have scratches that'll be way harder to get out, and you won't catch them until the end. So the sanding process doesn't vary for the next few grits, but I go from 80 grit to 100 to 120, 150, 180, 220, and then to 240. Once I get to the 320 grit, I'm going to detach my vacuum attachment from my random orbital. Here on out, I will be wet sanding, and I don't want it to pull water into my sander, and I don't want the water to be dried any faster than it needs to be. I spray the surface with a small pressurized water bottle. This is very handy, especially when I'm doing large tables. If I'm sanding and the water dries up, I spray it again. What I don't want is fine sanded particles clumping together and causing deeper scratches than the grit that I'm on. Once I get to 1000 grit, I spray the piece and the sandpaper just to make sure there's enough water on it. In the higher grit, I have more of the sandpaper touching the project, so I found that it generates more heat than the lower grits, and heat is the enemy of resin. So I want to keep it as cool as possible. At 1000 grit, I also hit all the corners. With 1000, it can't change the shape very easily, but it can take off the extremely sharp corners that I've had up until this point. From 1000 grit, I go to 2500, then 4000, using the same process for each one, except for 2500 and 4000, I don't bother to hit the corners again. Once those are done, it's time for polishing. So I'm using a large Makita polisher, but they make polish pads for random orbital sanders as well. I add polish to the project and then water to the pad and keep the polisher on its slowest speed. If I didn't want the sandpaper to get dried out, I really don't want to get the polish pad dried out. It is very grabby, which means it can heat up very quickly. If the resin gets hot, it gets soft and becomes much easier to scratch. So a little clump of sanded material or dried polish can clump and scratch the resin, and it will cause you to scratch your head all day wondering, why are there still scratches in this? I've been polishing it for hours. And then while you're yelling at your project, your wife will come running in yelling, what is all this yelling? And you will look up at her. Since you were distracted, you'll loosen your grip on your resin, and the polisher, which you had on the fastest setting it could be on, will grab it out of your hand, fling it across the room, causing it to hit your wife in the head, knocking her out, and causing her to bleed all over the floor. And as you're trying to bring her around, cops will walk in your open garage door, about to tell you that your dog was running loose on the streets. And then they'll see you over her seemingly dead body with all her blood all over you, and they'll slam you to the ground and start beating you, asking you, what did you do? And just before they take you too far and you're almost dead, your wife comes around and says, oh no, it was an accident. And they say, oh, okay, and they go on their merry way and everything's fine again. But you think to yourself, this could have all been avoided if I didn't let my epoxy get too hot. So, moral of the story, keep the epoxy cold. Keep the polisher on the slowest speed and keep it wet, keep it cool. Okay. Along with that, always keep the polisher or the project moving to help with even polishing. So I did add what would normally be my last step with the polisher to some paper towel, just so you could see the product being used, but I normally use a polish pad in the same way I did for the cut polish. But I didn't want to use another polish pad for such a small project. And it was shiny enough for this project anyway. And that's all there is to it. So as you can see, this looks beautiful once it is all polished up. And I'm not gonna say that this is the only way to polish epoxy or resin, but this is how I do it. There may be some other better ways. If you guys have a better, faster, quicker way of polishing this stuff, leave it down in the comments. But now I do wanna show you what it looks like if you didn't quite sand properly through one of the grits. If you take a look at this, you can see just off to the side there that the light just catches it. You'll see a tiny little scratch. And that is from one of the grits not being sanded thoroughly. Now it's impossible to tell which grit it was, unfortunately. So you have to go back, try it from where you think it is. What I like to do is, if I can see that, I'll start off with a high grit, kind of work my way down until I can see that getting scratched away, and then restart everything from that grit on. That's why it is super important to thoroughly sand every single grit. Do it 2-3 times, whatever it takes. This one, it's just a little table decoration, so I'm not really that concerned about it. But if it were a table that I was building for somebody, then you'd have to go through all the process. That's why any epoxy table that I sell that is polished, it's way more expensive. It's way more labor intensive. This little thing is pretty easy to do because you just put the sander in one spot basically, whereas this table, you're out in that whole thing, you're going over it really slowly. It takes a long time. It takes a long time to do a table, but for something like this, and if you wanted to do something like this and you don't have a sander, you can put double-sided tape down for the sandpaper, which is inexpensive, and just put it on the table and rub this back and forth. That'll work just as well. It'll take a little longer, but it's definitely doable. Well, that's all I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like this video as it really helps the channel, and subscribe so you don't miss out on our 10,000 subscriber giveaway. Details are in the description. If you have a project that you want to see me do, leave it down in the comments. That's it, and I'll see you in the next one. That's right on, Kings. I'm the kingliest. Yeah. Oh, I like that.